Welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe and to my stories just for you today. Thank you. Hello, I am Sarah Lloyd-Winter and today I'm going to tell a series of Japanese stories, hence the beautiful kimono behind me. And I'm starting with a story about Japanese gods. When Japanese gods are a brother and a sister, it's no different from brothers and sisters in any other part of the world. When their arguing gets out of hand, they know no barriers. Now these gods were the god of light and the sun and the god of winds and storms. And this brother and sister had an enormous argument that tumbled out of control around the world until he, throwing a storm, killed one of her handmaidens, and that was the last straw. And the god of the sun and the light turned her back on the world, marched up to the top of a mountain, went into the deepest and darkest cave she could find, rolled across an enormous stone and hid herself from the world. And when the god of sun and light hides herself from the world goes dark. So all the other gods came scrambling up to the top of the mountain, and they had a meeting, and they elected one member to go and talk to her. And he went across, and he stood outside the cave, and at first he requested, and then he asked, and then he demanded she came out. And nothing worked. And when that didn't work, he pleaded and he begged that she would come out. And that didn't work. There was nothing he could do, and he marched back to the other gods. And every day there would be meetings, and someone would go across to the cave, and they would ask and request and demand and plead. Different times, different orders, but the same thing happened. Now one god looked at all this and thought, that's never going to work. You've got to use a bit of thoughtfulness and cunning, she thought. You've got to do things carefully. Think about it. And so she started planning. She started collecting grasses and leaves and bamboo shoots. And the other gods looked on and thought, she's finding things to do in this time of darkness and difficulty. She's finding things to do. And she did collect an enormous pile of grasses, and then big round leaves in another pile, and then tall bamboo shoots in another pile. And then she started putting them together, making something. And the other guards just laughed. You know, she can't help it. She's keeping herself busy. She was keeping herself very busy, but she was organised and focused. And soon the grasses had been made into something. The big leaves were drawn together, and the bamboo shoots, well, they made an enormous structure. Then she called the servants and asked for a big bathtub, a Japanese bathtub, to be brought up the mountains. The gods were looking on in astonishment. What she want a bathtub for? She could have a bath in the dark at the top of the mountain. Then she called for musicians, 2 beautiful, elegant musicians to play for her. Oh, she's going to have a bath and get somebody to play for her. She'll need candles in the dark too. And then she went and found the biggest, most glorious mirror anybody had ever seen. It was so big and beautiful, and all the way around the edge were jewels. And they glinted, and they made the light of the mirror look so beautiful that anybody who looked into it could only look further and deeper inside, because it seemed to soften and glow their image. Well, this god, she was nearly ready. And then she laid out seats, and on each seat she put food and drink. And of course, the gods, well, think it's time for a break. May as well sit down. And she turned over the bath. And there it was, like a stage in front of them. Oh, they said, we're going to have a show. Perhaps the musicians are going to leap on top. But no. For Azuma, the little god, put the grass around her like a skirt. Then she put the big leaves on the top like a cloak. And then the great bamboo structure went on her head. And she climbed onto the top of the bath, overturned as a great big stage, or a tiny little stage really. But she made it feel immense and important. And just to her side was the glowing mirror, looking beautiful. She called the musicians and they started to play. And the little god started to dance in the most peculiar and amazing way. And the gods started to cheer. And then they realised she was taking off pieces of the grass skirt. It was so ridiculous. And you see how she's pulling off. And then, have you noticed? She hasn't got anything on underneath. Every time a leaf comes off, there's another little bit. And they were cheering and shouting and laughing and giggling. Oh, it was great fun. And as she got more twisty and turny and the laughter got louder and the cheering got louder and they drank a bit more and then the cheering got louder and the laughter. Inside the cave, a god who was used to being in control of everything realised that nobody was worrying about her anymore at all. And so she came to the doorway and tried to hear. But there was that great big stone in the way. So she moved it very slightly and tried to hear, but she couldn't hear properly. So she moved it a bit further and outside, the little goddess was throwing off leaves and the people, gods, were cheering and catching the leaves and shouting. And inside the cave, that goddess was pushing and pushing. And then suddenly, the big stone seemed to roll away. And she looked out and her light shone out of the cave and it went straight across to the mirror. And there, in that beautiful mirror, with the jewels round the edge, was an amazing picture of the goddess of light. And out she walked back into the world. And the gods turned round and they didn't know who to applaud more, the goddess for coming out and saving the world, or the little goddess who had danced so outrageously. And she became known as the goddess of the dance. And it is said that that was the world's first striptease. Thank you. And here is another story. And this one is about isolation and what happens when you get left on your own. The young man had been in the woods all winter, and now in February, it was the worst time. His mind was playing tricks on him, and he'd been isolated so long he didn't know what he was doing anymore. And this evening, he was stood staring out the window, watching the snow come down yet again, watching the icicles form on the branches yet again, and thinking of the endless days until the spring came. And as he looked out at the branches of the trees and watching the icicle form, he imagined it as a young woman. The long, dark branch was her hair flowing down the back. The pale icicle at the end was her face, a round oval, and the slight touch of pink coming through with her lips. And he could see her there, the beautiful icicle maiden on the tree, and he sighed. He was in love with the icicle maiden. And then he shook himself and went to bed, for it was an illusion. In the middle of the night, suddenly there was a knocking at the door, a loud noise. He ignored it. He was in the middle of nowhere and nobody ever came near. But it kept going. The knocking was persistent, and he went to the door and opened the door, and there was a bundle. Looked like a bundle of clothes, but he looked closer and it was a woman, and she was so cold. And he picked her up and brought her in and wrapped blankets round her. She was so icy that she wasn't moving, and at first he thought she was dead. But then gradually he could feel she was breathing, and he banked up the fire and stayed with her all night. In the morning she opened her eyes and looked round, and she smiled deep into his eyes, saying thank you, even though she didn't say much. And she stayed, and one day became 2, and 2 days became 3, and 3 days became 4, and by the end of the week she was up and moving round and helping out and cooking. And suddenly he wasn't lonely anymore. There was somebody else in his life, and they were talking and thinking and planning, and it was lovely. But then there was one problem. She wouldn't have a bath. Now, the bath wasn't just about being clean. It was very important spiritually as well. And every time she was offered the bath, she said no, 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 thank you. And he started to get a bit worried. And he said, I will make everything, I will do it. The bathhouse is outside and I will... No, she said no. And every day, until it became really, really vital to him that she would go and have a bath. So he went out and he boiled the water, and then he put the tiniest bit of scented oil in it that he'd been saving, and then he found some petals and he sprinkled them on the top. And it did look beautiful, and he went and got the best towels he could find and he put them out there. And then he picked her up, and laughing he ran outside and put her in the bathhouse and slammed the door. And thought nothing more of it. Thought she'd get the hint, really. An hour passed and she didn't come back. Oh, perhaps she's really enjoying it. 2 hours and he started to get worried. 3 hours and he went outside and knocked on the door and there was no answer. 3.5 hours and he could bear it no longer, and he flung open the door. And she wasn't there. There was nothing there. There was a thin sheen of ice across the bathtub, and round the edge there were little icicles all the way round. Thank you. So, I have told 2 stories that sort of link with a bathtub. Now this story hints at the beautiful kimono and the colours. This is a story about the Autumn Festival. Now we think about the Cherry Blossom Festival, but they also celebrate in Japan the changing of the colour of the leaves, and they go and sit in the mountains in the wild and look at the beautiful colours that are around them. And this is a story from then. The young woman was full of anticipation, for this year she would host a party to celebrate the festival of the changing of the colours of the leaves, the autumn festival. And she'd been planning it for weeks. She knew exactly where they were going to go and set up the tent, so it looked across the valley at the beautiful colours wending their way down the hills. And she planned the tent and the decorations and the food and the drink and the musicians. And she sat there in the morning getting dressed, and as she brushed her hair, she felt like sometimes she felt before. There was someone else over her shoulder, somebody hiding at the corner of the mirror, another part of her, that she was perhaps two people, that there was something bad. And then she shook herself and said, "Don't be silly, you're just getting anxious about the festival." And she put on her beautiful kimono, and she called her maidservants, and off they went, up into the mountains. Oh, and her tent did look beautiful, and the colours she had chosen worked amazingly. And her guests arrived, and it was so elegant. And then there was all the beautiful food she planned and the drink, and the musicians were so good. And it was an elegant time, and everybody was enjoying themselves when one of the maidservants came up and said, "There is a young samurai walking up the hill with his companions. He's on his own, in that he's not going to another group to celebrate. He has no party to join. Should we invite him?" And the young woman said yes. And the young samurai was very elegant and quite handsome, and she invited him in, and he was very polite. And he joined the celebrations, and he ate and he drank, and he joined in with the gentle singing. And then he asked her to dance, and she danced so beautifully and elegantly. Oh, it was such a wonderful afternoon. And in the heat of the afternoon, with all the food and drink inside them, the guests started to relax and snooze and sleep. And the young man, the young samurai, fell asleep. Now he had a secret. He had been a samurai fighting many wars, and it made him feel sad and empty. And he gave up being a fighter, and he went to the temple and threw himself at the mercy of the monks and said, "I have fought and killed many people, but it has left me feeling empty. Please, what should I do now?" And the monks thought, and they said, "We think you should fight the evil. We will give you a task. You are to go out and find the devils, the goblins, the witches, the evil things, and kill them. And that will fill your soul and drive away the emptiness." And so that's what the young samurai did. He went from place to place, finding goblins and devils and demons and ridding the area of them. And today he was due to go up the mountain to find the witch of the mountain and kill her. But he'd been distracted by a beautiful young woman and her elegant party, and there he was, lying asleep on her cushions. And in his dreams, the monks came to him and said, "What are you doing? You have forgotten your task. You're supposed to be killing the witch of the mountains, and what are you doing? Enjoying the lovely day and the company. Wake up and raise your sword. Catch the sunlight on the blade of your sword and shine it on the faces of your companions. And one of them will reveal itself as the witch of the mountains." And suddenly the young man was awake, and he looked around, and then he remembered to raise his sword, and he caught the sunlight on the sword and he shone it into the eyes of the companions, and it hit the face of the beautiful young woman. And suddenly she started to change. Her legs became thick and wide like big tree trunks, and her stomach enlarged, and her body thickened, and her neck got taller and taller, and her face became covered in hair as her muscles on the shoulders stood out, and on top of her head grew 2 enormous horns, and out of the top of the horns came fire leaping forwards, and her fingers changed to claws, and she roared as only a witch of the mountain can roar. And the young man caught up his sword, and soon the battle commenced, and they fought together. Sometimes the witch was winning, and sometimes the young samurai was winning, and the battle went on into the evening until the moon came out, and he caught the moon on the sword, and he plunged it deep into the witch's heart, and she shriveled and died. But as she died, the witch disappeared, the horns went down, the face changed, the claws disappeared, the thickness of the body disappeared, and she became the beautiful young woman again. And there was something in the beauty and the sadness of her smile as she clutched at the sword and died that suggested that the witch of the mountain actually was relieved. Thank you. So after all that death and destruction, I think we should have something light and fun. So this is the dancing mushrooms. There were 3 woodcutters, and they have been sent from their own wood to a new wood to look for some special pear wood. And off they went to the new wood. And their own wood, they knew exactly which way to go, and every pathway and every tree. This new wood, within half an hour they were lost. And they turned to each other, and the argument started. It's your fault. You were not looking where you were going. You should have turned left. No, you said we should turn right. And they were bickering and shouting, but suddenly they heard an even more strange noise, and they were scared. It sounded very unearthly. It's devils, they said, and hid in a bush. But the noise was so intriguing, they peered out, and they could hear female voices coming up the hill. And they looked and were shocked. It was nuns. Now, in every part of the world, in every religion, nuns do not sing naughty bawdy songs, and they do not dance in that manner. And the 3 woodcutters just peered out of the bushes and looked, mouths open. Huh? And they didn't draw themselves back quick enough, and the nuns saw them. Oh, hello! What are you doing there hiding in the bushes? They said. Come out, come out! Oh, we must tell you our tale. Oh, it has been such a difficult time, they said. We left home, 2 days ago, just to go and get some special flowers for our altar. And we went into the woods and we got totally lost. I mean, you're woodcutters, you wouldn't get lost like us, would you? No. We were totally lost. And after a day and a half of no food and no water, we saw these mushrooms. And we thought, well, if we die, we're going to die anyway. But if they're okay, we'll live. So we picked all these mushrooms, and we've been eating them, and we are living. So they're totally fine, and they've made us feel so lovely. We've been singing and dancing all the way through the wood. Oh, would you like some mushrooms? And the woodcutters thought, well, they're still alive, and we are very hungry. So they started to eat too. And their shock at the bawdiness of the song of the nuns started to increase, and the nuns were still singing. Oh, do you know the one about the weasel down the trousers? she's been telling us that one. Yes, and the weasel goes down the trousers, dee-dum, the weasel goes down the trousers, dee-dum. And then, no, you don't like that one. Oh, okay. And they went on singing naughty songs. And soon, the woodcutters seemed to be sharing the songs, and then they were skipping and hopping and dancing and doing all those sort of traditional dances that everybody does. And once they're very drunk, and they were stripping the willow and turning round and swinging their partners, and it went on late into the night. And the more they ate the mushrooms, the happier they all seemed to be. And then, it got a bit much. And the nuns went and slept over there, and the woodcutters went and slept over there. And then, in the morning, the nuns woke up and looked. Oh, my goodness. It was the morning after the night before. And that strange feeling had departed, and they knew they had to go, and they shuffled off as quickly as possible down the hill that way. Well, the woodcutters woke up, had a look around and thought, oh, we dreamt it. But then they saw the empty basket where the mushrooms had been and knew they'd been involved too. And they felt embarrassed because nuns shouldn't behave like that. And so as quickly as possible, they went that way. But somehow the story got out. And ever afterwards, that little mushroom has been known as the dancing mushroom for many reasons. Thank you. This story is a ghost story, but it's a strange ghost story. When her father married again, the young woman decided that she couldn't live with her stepmother. And so her father built her a little house in the corner of his garden. Oh, it was such an elegant house. It was green. And she was able to decorate it herself. And she and her maid Yoni lived there together. Now, as soon as they would set up, they wanted to have a special tea party to celebrate the house. And so she invited the family physician. And the family physician brought a young samurai. And they sat and they had tea. And the young man and the young woman looked at each other. And they looked deep into each other's eyes. And they were smitten. Never had the words true love been spoken more quickly between two people. But they felt true love. And at some point in the tea, she managed to lean over towards him and say, "If I never see you again, I will die." Now the doctor, the family physician, he watched this. And he was angry. He was not a matchmaker. He had not come here to organise a relationship between these two people. And it felt like it was beneath him. Ha! So he would have nothing to do with it. Once the goodbyes were said on that day, he would not hear anything from either side. The young lady would invent all sorts of illnesses and call him round and then say, "And the young samurai?" And he would say, "Oh no, he's ill. Oh no, he's gone away. Oh no, I haven't heard from him for ages." And the same from the young samurai. He found really interesting reasons why the physician needed to come to see him, and then he'd drop hints at the young lady. "Oh no, she's quite ill." The young lady, how is she? "Oh, she's very, very ill." The young lady, "She's dead." And then the family physician went to the young lady and, "The young samurai?" "Oh, he's dead." Now the samurai may have coped, but the young lady didn't. and she pined and refused to eat and then refused to drink, and she died. And Yoni, her maid, followed her soon afterwards, and they were laid to rest in a large stone sarcophagus. The young man, he pined for his beautiful young woman. And on the night of the death day, the day when everyone remembers the dead, he laid out his shelf, lit his candle, opened his doors for the spirits to come in, and watched the sun go down. And he was sitting there when it was dark, and suddenly he heard kara, 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 the wooden soles of Japanese ladies' shoes coming along outside his house. And there was a light, a little peony lantern bobbling along. He was intrigued. He went down to his garden gate and opened the door, and there, oh, there was his young lady and Yoni, her maid. Ah, the joy of both of them. I thought you were dead. I thought you were dead. Oh, it's so wonderful. And he brought her inside and they talked all night, and then she said, I have to go. And she disappeared. But she came back every night. And it kept happening. He would be sitting there and he could hear the kara, 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 kara of her feet. And then the peony lantern bobbly, 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 bobbly along. And after a while, he didn't even go to the gate. She would open the gate and come in. Now this was not missed by the samurai's garden boy. He saw all this happening. And being the sort of young man he was, he thought he knew what was going on and he wanted to see. So during the day, when the samurai was out, he made a little hole in the corner of the house. And that night, as soon as the young lady and the maid had gone in, he crept up to the house and put his eye against the hole to see what he could see. And he watched as the young lady came in and embraced. And then she seemed to take off clothing, and he could see her beautiful form, and it went down, and then there was nothing. It was like a mist. There was no body. There was no body. There was nothing there. And running like a mad thing, he ran out of the garden, up the hill to the pub, because you always run to the pub when you're a young man and you don't know what you're seeing. And he fell over a monk outside the door, and he explained it all, coming out, young lady, nothing on, but there was not nothing on, it was just invisible and strange. The monk listened, and he grew worried. And the monk suggested various things. He said, write a religious tract and pin it over the doorway, and take this amulet and find some excuse to make sure your master wears it. Well, the garden boy went back and he stuck the religious tract above the door. And he managed to persuade the young man that this amulet had come from his mother, and it was specially sent to protect the young samurai. And so the young samurai felt he ought to wear it. And that night, the kara, kara, kara came, the lantern, and the young woman and her maid Yoni went to the door, but they couldn't get in. It was like there was steel in front of the door. They couldn't get through. And they went away. And they came back the next night, and the same thing. They couldn't get in. On the third night, Yoni had an idea. Once they were in the garden, she looked round and could spy the garden boy hiding in his hut. And she took 2 gold coins and walked up to him and said, "I will give you 1 gold coin now if you take down the religious tract and take off the amulet from your master. And the 2nd gold coin you will get when it is done." Well, strangely enough, the young man was more smitten by the gold than the fright, and he agreed. And the next day he took down the religious tract and asked if he could borrow the amulet. That night, a kara came outside the house, the peony lantern. In they came, the mistress and the maid, and into the house. But that morning, no one left. And the garden boy could bear it no more, and he wanted his gold. So he went to the door of the house, flung open, shouted, no answer, went into his master's bedroom. And there he found his master laid out as if in ecstasy on the bed, naked, and wrapped round him was a skeleton. And in the corner was a pile of bones with 2 fingers holding up the 2nd coin. Thank you. Now here is a silly tale to finish. There was once a lady who had a tapeworm inside her insides, as my grandmother would say, but she didn't know it, and she became pregnant. And somehow the tapeworm and the baby got mixed up, and the baby became a baby tapeworm, and the lady gave birth to a baby tapeworm who grew up looking like a little boy. Oh yes, he did eat a little more than other boys, but she thought he was just a healthy young baby. And she didn't have any others, so she gave him everything he wanted. And he grew up quite intelligent. He could do his letters and his reading and his writing, and he got quite bright, and he did all his civil service exams, and he got quite high. And one day he became a local governor. Now he set out to go to his new governorship. And this was a land where they grew walnuts. Oh, walnuts in every form were used. So they were eaten as walnuts. They were cooked. They were ground. They were made into oil. They were made into paste. However you could use a walnut, they used it. And the area celebrated it. And here was their new governor, and they welcomed him to their feast. But everything seemed to contain walnuts, and since birth the young man hated walnuts in any form. And it became a barrier. The young man, the new governor, is not supporting us. How are we going to cope with him if he doesn't eat walnuts, if he doesn't drink walnuts? It's all right, said one of the men. I have an idea. If I grind up walnuts really small and put it in spirit, he will not know, but he will drink and celebrate the walnut with us. So they got the most powerful spirit they could find, potato and parsnip, sort of neat alcohol. And into that they placed invisible ground walnut, and they placed it in a beautiful gold cup, jewels round. And the smell of that parsnip and potato alcohol spirit was so strong you couldn't smell or anything taste the walnuts. So the young man drank, but then he started to change and wobble and leak like a drip, like something losing its fat. all the water in him ran out. His face changed and became a jelly, and he sunk onto the ground because, as everybody knows, tapeworms can't cope with walnuts. Well, I'm not sure that that is scientifically factual, but folklorically it was. And there was the puddle of the ex-governor. And everyone turned to each other and said, he was just a tapeworm. Thank you. I have been Sarah Lloyd-Winter, telling tales from Japan. I hope you enjoyed my tales. If you did, and if you have any spare little bits and pieces of money and would like to donate them to me, it would be very lovely if you could put them in a hat. The hat that comes up after my reel of stories has been shown. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you watch all the tellers of this beautiful World Storytelling Cafe, and I hope that if you've never seen any storytelling before and you happen to come across us, you will come and see us. See storytellers perform somewhere live after this whole event. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.
Did you enjoy that storyteller? Of course you did. And if you enjoyed it, like the minstrels of old, we're passing round the hat. And if you have some, whether it's paper or coin, our storytellers would appreciate what you put in. Every penny you put in goes directly to that storyteller through PayPal. All you have to do is go to worldstorytellingcafe.com, click on today's stories or click on that storyteller, and there'll be a hat below the story, and you can just drop a little in that hat. Well, thank you for listening. And if you can afford it, we'd appreciate it.